This coverage is sponsored by Richer Sounds Manchester. Call 0333 900 0086 for the best prices and expert advice for TVs, AV and Hi-Fi. Hello everyone, Vincent Teo from HDTV Test here. In this video, we are going to review the Sony VPL-VW790ES 4K laser projector, which is also known as the VW915ES in the USA. It is the successor to the Sony VW760ES, and despite the addition of some new features over the 760, the Sony 790 has been given a lower launch price of £12,000, making it the Japanese brand's most affordable native 4K laser projector yet. The chassis will look familiar to anyone who has owned a Sony projector, with a centrally mounted lens flanked by air vents. The gently curved top of the VW790 sports a Sony logo and laser label, as well as 4K SXRD inscription. The connections are located on the right side of the chassis, including two HDMI 2.0B ports with no HDMI 2.1 features implemented. On the left side of the chassis, there are some physical buttons which might come in handy should you misplace the remote control, however unlikely owing to its sheer size. Talking of which, the remote control offers dedicated buttons for direct access to different picture presets and settings submenus, and can be backlit in blue with the press of the light button for operation in the dark. Lens zoom, shift, and focus can all be done electronically using the remote control, with a very convenient lens memory functionality, although we are slightly disappointed that a motorized lens cover was not provided at this price point. Let's talk about picture quality, which I know many of you care about. We are big fans of laser light engines in projectors for their quick startup and power down time, resistance to colorimetric drift, and most importantly, the ability to produce a bright and stable image with a silky smooth quality to our eyes. Even with laser light output lowered to minimum, our Sony 790 or 915 review samples still clocked over 100 nits on a 100-inch screen with a 1.0 gain, which bodes well for better HDR presentation, which has so far been found wanting on previous projectors, owing to limited light output. Within the advanced iris and laser settings submenu, there is a dynamic control option too, which activates the laser dimming and dynamic iris combo, marketed by Sony as dual contrast control. In practice, we only saw it working mainly in low APL scenes, with the control having little to no effect on high APL scenes even on the most aggressive full setting. The SXRD panels on the Sony VW790 produced deeper blacks than any other projectors on the market except JVC's class-leading DILA machines. SDR color accuracy was excellent on our review unit after calibration, with an average delta error of 1.3 on this challenging Color Checker SG chart where 140 patches were measured, and no inaccuracies exceeding the humanly perceptible threshold of delta error 3. As a result, colors including skin tones looked natural and cinematic in real-world content, although to our eyes it could come across a bit clinical due to mild film grain suppression, which we shall discuss later in this video. Correct reproduction of 24 frames per second is even more important as the screen size gets larger, and the Sony 790's native 24p playback was simply sublime, presenting movies in a smooth manner with motion flow set to off or true cinema, without any sign of telecinic judder. On these settings, motion resolution came in at the sample and hold baseline of 300 lines. Setting motion flow to smooth low or smooth high would double motion resolution to 600 lines. But this would not only introduce opera effect or SOE to 24p films, but also incur some interpolation artifacts, especially in scenes containing complex moving sequences. The VW790ES or VW915ES is equipped with a new X14 projector video processor, which we didn't find to be as impressive as the company's X1 Ultimate chipset implemented on higher-end Sony televisions. On this SMPTE RP133 test card in 576 resolution, the projector retrieved nice detail, albeit with some junk pixels, overshoot and fizziness, although we would like to think that not many owners of this £12,000 projector would be watching much standard definition content. On this 1080p test pattern from the Spears & Munsell HD benchmark disc, full chroma bandwidth could be restored by engaging game mode, or even better, input lag reduction in any picture preset. Like all Sony projectors we've tested so far, the VPL-VW790ES applied a mild layer of noise reduction in all picture modes, even with all noise reduction controls turned off, which affected fine detail and film grain integrity. Fortunately, the always-on noise reduction could be defeated by engaging input lag reduction, which surprisingly still preserved correct 24p reproduction without introducing telesynic judder. So this can certainly be a worthwhile workaround for video enthusiasts out there who wish to see fine detail and film grain in a manner intended by the director. As mentioned earlier in this video, HDR has traditionally been very challenging for projectors since they can never reach the peak brightness of direct view displays. But the Sony 790's formidable light output allowed it to make a better fist of HDR than most other projectors, with the pin-sharp true 4K resolution being the cherry on top. Unlike what many had initially assumed when the projector was first announced back in September, I think, the Sony VW790 doesn't seem to feature frame-adaptive dynamic tone mapping, at least not in the truest sense of the technology. There is the usual contrast HDR setting which lets you determine the clipping point in HDR movies. The lower the value, the more the specular highlight detail you'll resolve, but the overall brightness or APL would also look darker. The dynamic HDR enhancer setting is what some quarters have mistaken as dynamic tone mapping, but it certainly is not, since by itself it didn't recover more specular highlight detail that was clipped in the first place. Instead, dynamic HDR enhancer appeared to apply an S-curve to the PQ-EOTF or perceptual quantization electro-optical transfer function, darkening shadow regions to give the appearance of inkier blacks, while brightening the midtones to make HDR look brighter. Because of its near-black EOTF manipulation, dynamic HDR enhancer could actually exaggerate low APL polarization, which wasn't exactly smooth to begin with. Indeed, once we put up a near-black quantization test pattern, we could see the serrated gradients being shifted by different dynamic HDR enhancer settings, which would also manifest itself in a handful of dark scenes in real-life viewing. On this white clipping pattern from the HDR10 testis from Diversified Video Solutions, engaging dynamic HDR enhancer retrieved highlight detail up to 1500 nits, equating to a native contrast HDR setting of 60, which is constant rather than dynamic, so you will still need to adjust other settings if you wish to preserve 4000 nit specular highlight detail. Otherwise, Sony provides two baseline tone curves, HDR10, which works better across a variety of HDR material mastered to different peak brightness, and HDR reference, which hard clips close to 1000 nits, seeking to mimic the behavior of a Sony BVM-X300 reference broadcast monitor. With no additional color filter on board, DCI-P3 color gamut coverage was capped at 89% UV, while Rec 2020 coverage was 65%. There is some polarization in the skies of the Martian, which could be smoothed out by the smooth gradation decontouring filter at the expense of some fine detail. In terms of 3D playback, the Sony 790 or 915 resolved full HD 3D resolution and presented 50Hz and 60Hz 3D content smoothly without any frame rate conversion judder. For gaming, input lag measured 36 milliseconds with input lag reduction enabled, making the VW790ES one of the more responsive projectors for playing games on a big screen. To sum up, the Sony VW790ES is an evolutionary rather than revolutionary replacement for the VW760ES. The frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping that many had hoped for did not materialize, so owners will still need to tinker with the HDR settings manually on a title-by-title basis if they want to get the best out of each movie in terms of HDR presentation. Nevertheless, the Sony VW790 still delivered one of the brightest, silkiest, and punchiest picture we've seen from a standard show projector in our test room, and so it receives our recommended award. If you would like to watch some of our other technical projector reviews, I've created a playlist here if you'd like to click on it, and I will see you in the next video.